So we often talk about those initial clinical trials, the smaller ones. And it might seem like after those, it's smooth sailing to get a new medicine out there.
Yeah, you'd think, right?
But when you scale things up, like with those massive clinical trials involving huge numbers of patients across a bunch of different hospitals.
Yeah, multi-center trials.
Exactly. Well, making
Mhm.
sure everything stays safe. That becomes a whole different ballgame.
It really does. Think about it. Keeping tabs on literally everything happening at all those different sites. The chances of something unexpected popping up, what we call adverse events, just skyrockets.
It's like trying to herd cats, but the cats are spread out all over the country.
More like all over the world, sometimes. But that's what we're digging into today. Those systems and processes, all those behind-the-scenes efforts to monitor, report, and manage anything that goes wrong in those big multi-center trials.
And we've got some really interesting sources that reveal just how much work goes into making sure patients are safe while still getting that crucial data. The data that tells us if a new treatment actually works.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
Totally. And this isn't just for the doctors or researchers out there. Anyone who's ever wondered how new drugs are checked for safety on a large scale. Or, if you're just interested in healthcare in general, this deep dive will give you a good look at those safeguards.
Absolutely.
We're going to unpack how these adverse events are defined, how they're tracked, the standardized ways they're reported, and all those safety checks that happen throughout the whole process.
It's a multi-layered system, that's for sure.
So let's kick things off with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say adverse event in these trials? And why does having a large trial make managing them so much trickier?
Well, the Anti-Cancer Drug Development Guide gives us a pretty clear definition. They say an adverse event is any unfavorable symptom, sign, or disease that includes abnormal lab findings. By the way, that happens around the same time as the treatment. And that event may or may not be considered related to the treatment itself.
Okay, so temporally associated, like they say.
Right. So it basically means the event happened when the treatment was given, but it doesn't automatically mean the treatment caused it. It's like a red flag that needs more investigation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider fields like oncology, right?
Mm,
As the guy points out, many patients already have a ton of symptoms because of their cancer.
exactly.
Figuring out if a new symptom is from the cancer getting worse or a side effect of the experimental drug. That's like trying to solve a puzzle in the dark.
It really adds another layer of difficulty. And then you zoom out to these giant trials with patients from all walks of life receiving treatment at different medical centers.
Yeah, tons of variables.
The challenge of spotting and handling those potential adverse events just explodes.
Well, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting here is that judging some of these events can be pretty subjective, like the guide mentions. Whether a patient says they're super tired or just a little nauseous,
Right.
it's their own perception. And then you have the healthcare professional evaluating them, who also brings their own interpretation to the table.
For sure.
So even if it's the same issue, you might get different descriptions or severity assessments. And when you have multiple research teams at different locations,
Oh, yeah.
that potential for things to vary really highlights the need for some kind of standard, consistent way of doing things.
Couldn't agree more. And that leads us perfectly to the NCI Common Toxicity Criteria, or CTC.
The CTC.
It's a game changer in terms of standardization.
Tell us a bit more about it. Why is it so important?
So the Anti-Cancer Drug Development Guide says the NCI CTC, it was updated to version 2.0 back in 1999. It's basically the foundation for how we standardize toxicity assessment, particularly in those early phase I trials.
So it's like the rule book.
You could say that. Picture it as this super detailed catalog of almost every adverse event imaginable, organized by organ system, like your heart, your gut, your nervous system, and broken down by specific clinical situations.
So it's way more in depth than just a basic checklist of potential problems.
Oh, way more. It goes into crazy detail. For every adverse event listed, the CTC gives you a specific grading scale, usually from 0 to 5. 0 basically means no toxicity, and a grade of 5 is the worst, life-threatening stuff.
So 0 to 5, got it.
And here's where it gets really cool. The guide gives a great example with diarrhea. The way they grade diarrhea actually changes if a patient has a colostomy compared to someone who doesn't.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
So for someone without a colostomy, the grade might be based on how many more times they're going to the bathroom each day. That obviously wouldn't work for someone with a colostomy, so they adjust the criteria.
Right.
That level of detail, it ensures that no matter where you are in the study, everyone's using the same measuring stick for the same event.
It's taking something that can be pretty subjective, and making it as objective as possible.
Exactly. And I can see how that would be super important when you're trying to figure out if an adverse event is actually linked to the drug being studied.
Totally.
And on that note, the CTC also gives you guidelines on how to assess that relationship, how connected the event is to the drug. They use specific terms like clearly related, likely related, possibly related, and so on.
So it's taking the guesswork out of it.
Right. This structured approach helps everyone, all those investigators at the different centers, evaluate the cause of an event in the same way. And the Anti-Cancer Drug Development Guide stresses that when you scale this up to multi-center trials, oversight of all the safety data becomes super important, and there's a lot of regulatory responsibility that comes into play.
So we have all these research centers sending in data on adverse events. Who's ultimately in charge of keeping track of all that information?
The sponsor of the trial, usually the drug company or research institution funding the study, they're the ones holding the reins. According to the Code of Federal Regulations Title 21, Part 312, the sponsor has to continuously review and evaluate the safety data coming in from all the investigators.
And that's throughout the entire study.
The whole thing, yep.
Wow, that's a massive undertaking. What are some of the specific things these sponsors have to do when it comes to reporting safety concerns?
The regulations are crystal clear on this. Sponsors are legally obligated to quickly report anything they find out that suggests a serious and unexpected risk with the drug to the FDA.
The FDA.
Yeah, and that includes any serious and unexpected adverse events. And this is crucial if a sponsor at any point concludes that the drug is just too risky for the people in the study.
Too risky.
They have to shut down any part of the investigation that's causing that risk immediately.
Immediately. So, stop everything right now.
Pretty much. The regulations say it has to happen as fast as possible, no later than 5 working days after the sponsor makes that decision. They also have to tell the FDA, all the institutional review boards or IRBs overseeing the study at each site, and every single investigator involved.
Okay, so everyone's in the loop.
Plus, they need to make sure any leftover supplies of the drug are accounted for and handled correctly. It's a whole process with checks and balances built in.
It's good to know those safety nets are there. But with potentially hundreds of research sites sending in data on adverse events, how do you even begin to make sense of all that information? It must be a mountain of data.
Oh, it is. The Anti-Cancer Drug Development Guide mentions that in these large-scale trials, you can easily have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of adverse events being reported.
Thousands.
Yeah, so putting all that data together effectively, that's the key to really understanding how safe the drug is overall. The source we have on artificial intelligence in drug development, it really stresses how powerful it is to combine different sets of data.
Combine different data sets.
It strengthens our grasp of what's happening clinically, especially if the data from any single site is limited or varies a lot.
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
But the pieces are scattered all over the place.
That's a great way to put it. And this is where technology, like artificial intelligence, is becoming a bigger player. AI tools have the potential to completely change how we integrate and analyze these huge amounts of data in drug development.
AI, yeah, it seems like it's everywhere these days.
For good reason. It lets us be more flexible and go deeper when analyzing complex data sets. But, and this is an important point from that same source, AI isn't meant to replace human researchers. Their critical thinking and expertise. Still essential.
Right.
It's more like AI is a powerful tool that makes them even better at what they do.
Yeah.
Helps them spot patterns and insights that might be hard to see otherwise.
So it's like a superpowered assistant for the researchers.
Exactly. You still need that human element to interpret the findings and make those crucial safety calls.
For sure. Now, we've talked a lot about monitoring and reporting during the trial itself, but safety surveillance doesn't stop once a drug gets approved. Right? It's not like mission accomplished and everyone goes home.
Absolutely not. That's where things get even more interesting. The principles of standardized reporting carry over into what we call the post-market phase through pharmacovigilance systems. We actually talked about this in our Season 5 deep dive on clinical trials Phase 3 and regulatory approval.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Once a drug is available to a much wider group of patients,
out in the real world,
yeah, healthcare professionals and patients themselves reporting adverse events directly becomes incredibly important.
So it's not just the drug company's responsibility anymore.
Exactly. National agencies like the FDA in the U.S. with their MedWatch program and the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, with their vigilance system, they collect these reports directly.
Directly from doctors and patients.
Yep. This gives a much broader, more real-world picture of how safe the drug is when it's being used routinely. And just like during trials, drug companies have strict rules about reporting serious and unexpected adverse events they hear about to these agencies. Fast.
From any source.
Right, any source. And they usually have something like 15 days to report serious events that aren't already on the drug's label.
Wow, 15 days. That's moving quickly.
It is. And on top of these immediate reports, they also have to file these big, comprehensive reports. They're called Periodic Safety Update Reports, or PSURs, or in the U.S., Periodic Benefit Risk Evaluation Reports, PDREs. They basically summarize all the adverse events reported during a certain time period, plus any new safety findings.
How often do they have to file those?
It depends. Often every 6 months in the beginning after approval, then annually. Regulatory agencies go through these reports with a fine-toothed comb to keep assessing the drug's safety over time.
So what happens if they spot new risks or safety concerns during these reviews?
They can step in and make changes to how the drug is used or described. Could be anything from adding warnings to the label, restricting who can use it, sending out Dear Doctor letters to healthcare providers about new safety info.
So those letters are like a heads up to doctors.
Yeah, basically. And in really serious cases, they can even temporarily pull the drug off the market if they think the risks outweigh the benefits.
Oh, so they're not messing around.
No.
You also mentioned something called active surveillance. How does that fit into all this post-market safety stuff?
Active surveillance, it's like an extra layer of monitoring. Instead of waiting for reports from doctors and patients, systems like the FDA's Sentinel initiative take a more proactive approach. They use huge electronic healthcare databases and insurance claims data to actively search for potential safety red flags.
So they're not just waiting for things to come to them.
Right, like they might track if there's a spike in a specific condition, like a certain type of heart problem, in people who recently started taking a new drug, all by analyzing these massive data
That's
sets.
incredible.
It's a way to catch potential safety problems that might slip through the cracks with just passive reporting. Because let's face it, not every adverse event gets reported.
Right. Some people might not even realize they need to report something.
Exactly. So active surveillance uses real-world data to back up the info from clinical trials and those direct reports.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more safety measure from the Anti-Cancer Drug Development Guide. Exclusion criteria in clinical trials. How do those help keep patients safe?
Oh, exclusion criteria, those are super important. Basically, they're a set of characteristics that disqualify someone from participating in a specific trial.
So it's about who's allowed in and who's not.
Right. And it's a safety measure right from the start. It helps avoid including people who might be more likely to have adverse events or who might not handle the treatment well. The guide gives an example from oncology trials about previous chemo treatment. There's usually a required waiting period like 4 weeks, or even 6 weeks if they had certain types of chemo before they can join a new trial.
So they have to be fully recovered from the previous treatment.
Yeah, and make sure they've had enough time to bounce back from any lingering side effects before being given the new drug. Otherwise, it'd be hard to tell what's causing any new problems.
Like, is it the new drug or a leftover effects from the old treatment?
Exactly. And the guide also points out that a lot of early phase studies have a waiting period, usually at least 2 weeks, for any meds that might interact with the study drug.
Interact, like clash with each other.
Yeah, like if they both need the same enzyme in the body to be broken down, it's all about being proactive and minimizing the risk of those unexpected interactions and potentially making the side effects worse. So yeah, exclusion criteria are about carefully choosing who gets into the study to minimize risks from day one.
This has been such a fascinating look into how adverse events are managed in these huge clinical trials. It's clear that there are all these systems and processes working together to make patient safety the top priority.
I agree, it's impressive. We've covered so much. We talk about what adverse events are and how tricky they can be to spot in these large studies.
Right, and how important the NCI-CTC is in standardizing things.
And then there's the whole layered approach to safety in trials involving multiple centers, the power of data integration, and how safety monitoring continues long after a drug's approved. We even touched on those upfront safety measures, the exclusion criteria.
It really highlights that keeping new medicines safe in these big clinical trials isn't just a one-time thing, it's an ongoing commitment throughout the whole process.
A constant balancing act between getting solid data and protecting the patients who volunteer for these studies.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And thinking about all this, the monitoring, the standardized tools, how data analysis is getting more advanced all the time, it really makes you think about how confident we can be in the safety of the medicines that end up being prescribed by our doctors. something to ponder, right?
It really is.